It's past the west side of Lake Manitowoc. Go by those sand dunes near the middle of the island. There should be a deer stand right at the start of the forest clearing, somewhere over there. The hotel attendant instructed, as though she'd given these instructions before to several other people before us. Right, so directly west of the life-saving station? That's where the lake is? Yeah, that's right. There should be a path if I recall. Goes past the dunes and heads to the clearing. You can't miss it. I had remembered the approximate location of the deer stand. I even looked at satellite imagery before me and David started our trip. The problem was, of course, that the satellite imagery was taken in the dead of winter, masking the entire island in white. It was hard to tell where the sand dunes started or their approximate location in regards to the lake. This was also the first time I had ever heard anything about a trail. You don't seem like you're sure. Say, is this your first time hunting here? She asked with a smile. Well, yeah, I said, continuing with, we're still a little new to hunting, but we got the basics. What type of rifles do you have? I've got a Ruger American, said David, shouldering his rifle case. Lucas has, what is that, a Ruger too? No, it's a Winchester, a .308 Winchester, I said, pointing to the Winchester label marked across the rifle case. Truth be told, David had hunted a total of 2 times. This had been his 3rd, and I have hunted 5 times before this. But already his father had given him his choice of 3 rifles, obviously proud of his son's new sport. Meanwhile, I had only my Winchester, of which I had to pay out of my pocket. That, and along with all the other supplies, set my wallet back a lot, to the dismay of my mother and father. Save up your money for college, they always insisted. I had plenty of cash, a steady part-time job, and this would be me and David's last year of high school. I should have a say in how I choose to spend my money. I was happy to see that David had brought along his Bushnell Equinox, so that we wouldn't be blind up in the tower. Apart from being equipped with night vision, it also gave us an opportunity to record our hunting. The air was crisp, biting our skin as we walked the trail heading in the direction of the lake. The night sounds were inviting and calming, as typical of late October in the Midwest, but the cold air, always reminding us that Lake Michigan was always no more than 2 miles in all directions. This was right before it got really cold here, freezing up the lake and allowing the deer to migrate over. You see, the Forest Service, or whoever owns the island, had been complaining about the severe amount of deer crossing the solid ice in the winters. The then not native deer would then proceed to devastate the island's native fauna and plants. This was interesting for me and David to find out, as they didn't seem to care how many deer you got, just as long as you... So where are they? David said in loud frustration. Too loud. Shh, you'll let them know where we are, I said back in a harsh whisper, trying to catch back up to him. Well, we're not hunting right here, and besides, for an island to have such a problem with deer, I haven't seen anything living since I got here. No, I said back. Listen. I wasn't sure what I had been hearing at first. At first I thought I had been hearing the sounds of something treading gravel just behind us. I chalked it up to just my own footsteps, the way flip-flops always made your footsteps sound further back than they actually were. Only I sure wasn't wearing flip-flops. Let's try walking again, slower. I figured that if the sounds were continuing at our new slower pace, and not the pace we had just been walking at, then that would prove it was just us. We walked slower now. David had a type of unconvinced look on his face, like he thought I was just pulling his leg or something. He reached into his pocket, silently, and pulled out his small pocket flashlight. He flicked it on and lit up the immediate woods ahead. There was no sound. Nothing apart from the crisp leaves blowing in the wind, the tree limbs rigid in pre-dormancy. But before I could take another step, David turned around, as did I. A low, deep bellow echoed throughout the forest. It reminded me of an elk or a reindeer's call, only much deeper. Me and David froze, the sound coming from probably 50 yards or so behind us. It wouldn't have been so unnatural and creepy if no animal in the Midwest was capable of producing that sound. What the hell was that? David said, turning his light to face me, staring for any movement. I don't know. It couldn't have been a deer. It almost sounded like... Another call. This one less steep and much closer. We both flinched to our left, where we had heard the sound. That's when I remembered David was the one who had the night vision camera. "Take out the Equinox," I said, motioning for him to hand me the flashlight, while he fiddled with his bag. David swung over his rifle strap and set his case on the ground. He then proceeded to unzip his bag and feel around for the Equinox. Of course, he never put things in a coherent order, always whatever fits now and worry about it later. Just then, movement caught my eye. I turned my head back towards where we had come from on the path, to see a deer. Startled by its silent approach, I pointed my light straight at it. It didn't run or show any signs of fear, it just stopped. It must not have had much experience with humans. Most deer reacted differently based on experience with lights. Deer that freeze up in the middle of the road instead of running were likely deer that hadn't encountered people yet, and so they remained still. This deer stopped, maybe for a second or two before approaching. That wasn't normal. At least I had never heard of a deer walking up to somebody pointing a strange, bright light at them. That's when I noticed this deer was making no sound. It approached slowly, but the gravel trail should have generated some sound. Its odd silence allowed me to notice something even more disturbing. This deer had claws, curled back and appearing to walk on widened knuckles. Its claws were long and curled towards its body, just like an anteater's. I found myself backing away closer to David. Why hadn't he gotten the Equinox out, or better yet, his gun? My fear was heightened when the deer opened its mouth and bellowed. That was this creature's call. Its mouth unhinged wide, extending almost down to its neck. Drool was dripping from its long, piranha-like teeth. Its sound permeated the woods around us, echoing in every direction. The animal continued, and I backed further away, before another call sent me jumping sideways, almost off the trail. I nearly tumbled to the ground, had there not been a small aspen tree for me to push off of. I could see what had made the call. Just beside David stood another deer, this one slightly smaller than the one on the trail. The deer I had shown my light at gave another haunting cry. The deer beside David called in return, then stepped closer and lowered its neck so that its head was right beside David's. David was motionless, his hands no longer digging into his bag, but clutched onto his half-open gun case. What was he doing? He didn't seem to have a look of fear or desperation, but rather a wide stare straight ahead. My rifle was on the trail, directly in the path of the deer on the trail. It hadn't reacted to my sudden jerk, nor had it continued walking. It seemed to be eyeing the deer beside David, who was now at eye level. David still didn't move, but I could see sweat coming down his face. Then the deer lifted its head smoothly, raising it high over David. The deer unhinged its jaws and let out another unearthly cry. This seemed to snap David out of it as he fully opened his case and pulled out his rifle. He didn't have half the time to spin around and shoot the creature before the deer swooped its head down from the right, like a farmer swinging a scythe. I couldn't read his expression as the deer, in that instant, unhinged its jaws and clamped down right onto David's skull. The deer shook its head violently like a crocodile as David's muffled screams seeped out. He put his hands up against the creature's jaws, trying to pry it off, but then the animal used its claws and put its full weight onto David, pushing him onto his back. I stood there, cold, hardly sure if this was even happening, but then reality hit hard like a punch to the gut. I had to help now. Darting my head to my rifle case, I turned to run and pick it up, forgetting about the deer standing on the path. Before I knew it, I had stepped out onto the path and was leaning down to get my gun case when the force of a freight train crashed into me from the left side. I could feel large punctures in my side and warm blood streaking down as I tumbled out of the way. The deer had charged me. I had expected the weight of the creature to be on top of me next, as I wheezed and gasped. I had gotten the wind knocked out of me. But as I rolled onto my right side, I saw the two deer, now in a group. Their heads were doubled over David, who was no longer moving. I could hear tears and crunches as the deer wrenched their heads back with force, jagged chunks of red meat hanging from their mouths. I struggled back up, not taking my eyes off the deer for a second. I must have been too obvious, though, because the deer that had originally been behind David reared its head up to look at me. The other deer tore another chunk from David's remains and shot its head up, then stepped closer. I backed away instinctively out of fear. I wasn't moving fast. The deer would surely walk up to me at this rate. My gun was directly in front of the deer, who had now stepped over David's crunched head and was now closing the distance to me. I had nothing to defend myself with. I couldn't throw anything at it. My flashlight. Without another thought, I pulled out my flashlight, flicked it on, and pointed it straight at the creature. The deer stopped in its tracks, its eyes glowing white off the light, streaks of red dripping from its jaws. For a moment, we both didn't move. I stood there with the light pointed at the deer not moving at all, while the other deer continued feeding. I slowly started to back away, further down the trail. The deer tilted its head and continued walking towards me, its pace no faster. The part of my brain, detached from fear, decided on an experiment. I turned my flashlight off, then on again to see if the deer would stop in its tracks. It did. For maybe 4 or 5 seconds before slowly continuing its approach, jaws open now. I tried leaving my light off for a longer interval, which bought me more time when I flashed it on, but those 3 seconds I had the light off, the deer had advanced a few more yards. This wasn't going to work, and now the deer behind it, having torn off a chunk of David's face, reared its head up to look at me now, too. The more I backed away, the more they seemed to pay attention, moving faster, snarling at me. I decided on my last option. My flashlight had a built-in strobe option, which made the light flash at about the same interval as a police light. I lightly pressed the flashlight button, and everything in front of me flashed into disorienting, flickering light. This was good. The creature seemed entranced and dumbfounded, seemed to not know what to do about the strange change in light. Now when I tried backing away, neither of the deers moved. I began to gain some composure back, until I glanced back at David's body. The reality hadn't fully set in, pushed back by panic, that I had just lost my best friend. I had to get back to the hotel, and tell them what? Nobody would believe a pair of deer came out from the woods and tore my best friend to ribbons. Mulling these thoughts over in my head, I almost didn't hear the sound of a low, guttural cry echo throughout the woods, behind me. Somewhere behind me, I didn't know if it was on the trail or somewhere in the woods. I gave a quick half-turn out of response to the noise before instantly correcting myself and refacing the 2 deer in front of me. Neither had moved. At least I didn't think so. I didn't want to think they did. The cry again echoed through the woods, much louder this time. The other deer didn't respond, still seemingly entranced in the strobe. I thought about making a run for it, but instead eased my breaths and thought quickly. If I turned left off the trail, it would take me to the south part of the island. That would do me no good. All that was down there was an old abandoned cemetery, and worse, sand dunes. I wouldn't be able to run in them, and they would get me for sure. My best bet was to turn right off the trail and stay out of sight. I might find a trail that could take me back to the life-saving station on the eastern side of the island. I slowly walked sideways off the trail, never once taking my light off the deer. Likewise, they never stopped staring at me, slowly turning their heads and following my movements, blood still streaking down their lower jaws. Once I was a good 10 yards away, and covered behind a tree, I turned my light off, and bolted. Squinting the best I could, I ran like hell, brushing thorns that tore slashes in my jacket, and nearly dodging trees, weaving the best I could all around them. I didn't hear the deer, no crunching of leaves or distant guttural cries. I still didn't turn my light back on, in case there were more around that still had no idea of my presence. Despite not being followed, I hadn't been the most scared up until now. Flashes of David's remains played over and over again in my brain like a film reel. The left side of my ribcage flared in agonizing pain, warm blood still sticking and streaking on my shirt. It made running about 5 times as hard as it should have been. I hoped that the deer hadn't punctured my lung when it ran me. I grunted and coughed, trying to let it out in my jacket to make less sound. I had hoped I had put enough distance between me and the creatures as I reluctantly slowed my run to a walk. There was no path up here. I had been wishfully thinking, but there wasn't much I could do. The sand dunes had no cover trees, and it would have slowed me down. I was now lost, not sure of which way I thought east was. I could use my phone and check my compass, but that would create light and... Wait, my phone. I could call the police. I could find a sheltered area and call the police. There were no police authorities on the island, of course, but maybe they could put me through to the life-saving station, and they could send somebody out here. I thought my prayers were answered when I saw a division in the trees. I assumed that maybe a trail connected the life-saving station on the east to the northern part of the lake, similar to the south trail me and David took. But it was actually a large clearing. Not a natural clearing, it was square in shape, sort of like a farmer's field. Not good, I thought. Deer often hang out in clearings, especially at night when nobody could shoo them off. And this island was full of deer with no natural predators or farmers. I'd have to go around the clearing. Maybe somebody was smart enough to put... Just as the thought occurred to me, while absent-mindedly scanning the tree line, I saw a sight from heaven. A tall, wooden deer stand on the other side of the clearing. I could get in, kick away the ladder, and... I stopped and turned. It was quiet at first, but from all around the woods I heard them. Not the singular low cries of the deer, but rather a symphony of deep, guttural wails. The sound was so uniform and absolute that I couldn't decipher where it was coming from, no matter how hard I tried. One thing I knew for sure, they wouldn't give me a second chance. I didn't think twice before charging down the field, stepping on crabgrass and thorns all the way. My lung flared up and burned with a throbbing pain. I could feel it in my chest, my left lung moving around without air. I spat blood in my deadly sprint, hearing cries echo throughout the woods, while the uniform cries grew louder. They were getting close. I wasn't gonna make it. I was halfway through the clearing, the cries growing too loud. I fiddled in my coat pocket, taking out David's flashlight and turning it on, never breaking my sprint. I waved it around me in circles at eye level, hoping that it would buy me all the time I needed. I jumped over a rock hidden in the grass, nearly tripping on it at the last second. Blood was running down the sides of my mouth and down my side. The pain was brutal. I slammed into the ladder before I even expected to reach it. I had to readjust it before I could climb up. I couldn't stop. I forced myself up the ladder as I heard the parting of grass and bushes all around me. I heaved myself up the ladder onto the platform just as the ladder began to shake under my feet. I sat up and began kicking the ladder, but it wouldn't move. Below me I could hear grunting and the clacking of horns. One of them was pushing against the ladder. In my desperate kicks, my flashlight rolled out of my pocket and into the forest below. My stomach heaved at the realization before sliding the ladder sideways and hearing it fall to the ground with a thunk of wood. I laid on my back, motionless, my heart on the brink of a spaz attack. I coughed blood to one side before wheezing and groaning in pain. My side wounds felt as though they had opened further, the blood slick on my skin and shirt. I couldn't catch my breath. I felt as though I was going to suffocate right then and there. All the while, those cries from hell never ceased. They got worse. They got louder. I used my phone to call for help. The police notified the life-saving station, who are apparently sending out 5 or 6 guys to come help. The police told me to stay on the line with them. I could barely talk, my voice hoarse at best. I sure hope that team has guns, whoever they are. The deer are very smart. They know I'm up here. Of course they do. They keep shaking the tower, taking running starts before slamming back into the supports. They've obviously tried this before. If I do survive this nightmare, I'll never go hunting again. Too loud. Oh shit. Oh, come on.